Okay, we will get started. There might be one or two more coming in, but we will get started. We've got a goodly number. There's nearly 200 of you already on this webinar. Thanks so much for joining us for this free webinar, which is being recorded. John Murphy has kindly joined us to outline some precautions around taking, storing and using images of children. John is the Chief Operating Officer at ISBA, where he is responsible for, amongst many other things, training and guidance to schools. We're delighted to have him with us today. Just before I hand over to John, can I suggest that if you have any questions, can you put them into the Q&A, which is either at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on how it's configured. And at the end of John's presentation, we will try to get through as many of those questions as possible. If there are so many we don't have time, we will get them and get John to reply to them afterwards and then get them through to you. So without further ado, John, thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Tori, thank you. Good morning, and good morning to all of you who have dialed in. It's good to have you with us this morning. This is a tricky little subject for a number of reasons. Really, the sort of first thoughts I had when putting this presentation together was, why do we think about this because we feel we have to share images? Why are we not thinking about it in a very protected way? Because we go a long way to make sure that children are safe in every other possible way from predatory behavior, and yet we're putting up these targets for people to, well, I was going to say ill-disposed people to take advantage of. So we've got to be careful about a thought process here, and that's really the first point. And really, that first bullet is, if you have got a risk-averse view, you don't have images taken, stored, or used, that's as safe as you can be. However, it's impractical. So we're going to have to think of a way of being as safe as we can and being practical at the same time, because, as you doubtless know, you need images of children for the administration of the school. You need an image, or usually each year, in the pupil file for those pupils that have got some allergy or some other problem, medical problem that they need to be known about. There's sometimes data sheets around the school with their face on and whatever the issue is that they've got. So there's a lot of other issues wrapped up in that. And that's fine from an administrative point of view, but marketing communications demand a sort of degree of risk acceptance, but we can do a few things to reduce that risk, and that's what I'm going to go through here. But really, we've got to decide what controls that schools can use to achieve that sort of comfortable risk level. And the other part of this, which is very awkward, is that none of us are starting from scratch here. We've all got systems in place now where there are images, obviously, in being. There'll be things on the side of minibuses. There'll be things in on social media, all kinds of bits and pieces of images, which have been perhaps around for some years, which means that we're not really starting from a level playing field, to put it crudely. So coming back to what we need this for, administration, we talked about. Obviously, assisting in education will be a thing. Celebrating achievements, obviously, a photograph of whichever child has got a certificate for something or has won something, whatever it is. Obviously, assisting in marketing, publicity, and in the online events that you'll be running. Some perhaps are streamed. So there's all sorts of things that happen now in schools that didn't happen perhaps 10 years ago. Certainly didn't happen 15 years ago. Because there weren't so many cameras around, and when there were, then it was all much more formal and much more formally controlled. And parents want these images because they will want things taken at school events of their children. They want the bragging rights, and as a grandparent, I absolutely understand that, and I'd love to hear how they're getting on. So you can understand how this happens. So there's a number of pressures on schools, which does make life a little bit tricky. So if you are thinking about putting this policy together, you've got to understand that it does not stand on its own. It's got to mesh in with the safeguarding, child-on-child abuse or bullying, online safety, and acceptable IT use. It's not something that sits by itself as a kind of standalone policy trumping everything else. I apologize for using that word. More more prominent than everything else. Let's put it that way. So it really needs to mesh in with those 4 that I put up on the screen, and there may be others that you've got as well. So when you're writing this, or if you haven't got one already, and there's a template policy which will go with the notes to this meeting, do make sure that it does plug into all those bits of other policies that are around, particularly safeguarding. So come to the legal bit first. Most images will be personal data, obviously. So that means you've got to comply with the UK GDPR. And you've got an obligation within the school to explain how pupils' personal data will be used. So you have to understand that any data you hold, you have to have a good reason for. That's the first point. And I mentioned at the bottom of that slide, is there a DPIA, a risk assessment, impact assessment for how those images are, or any piece of data actually, is gathered, stored, accessed, altered, and then disposed of. And you've got to have that little stream of sort of progress for each of the bits of data you hold, images in particular. So if you haven't got some idea of who's taking images, what's happening to them, how they got rid of, whatever, that sort of chain of events, if you want to put it that way, then maybe that's the first place to start. Just work out who's doing what, because you will find that people are doing things with images, because as I say, we're not starting from a level playing field, and you will need to make sure there's a little formalization of that system in place. So the one thing that doesn't come inside UK GDPR is parents taking images of their own children, because that's private. They're doing it perhaps on school premises. But if it does, if the pictures are taken on school premises, it may becomes under school's safeguarding obligation. So whilst it's private, it's not that private because it's being done whilst it's on school premises. So there's the thing. Now, the bottommost point on that, if the school is provided with images, i.e. you get them from a professional photographer, perhaps if somebody's been there taking a video, then the school becomes the data controller for those images. So there's some big responsibilities in this one slide under UK GDPR. So please note that images are all personal data. Note how they're being used, note how and control how those images are being progressed through to the point where they need to be disposed of, and explain how they're going to be disposed of to whoever it is. So that's the first bit of law. The second part then is there's a sort of good practice obligation here as well. Parents expect privacy in schools, and particularly with data. So you've got the written down bit, the legal part, but you've also got the parent expectations to deal with. So you might want to think about having a parents meeting or a newsletter article or something to make parents understand the child protection risks, the potential for the invasion of privacy, the potential for embarrassment, bullying, harassment of sharing pupil images. Sometimes parents are much more naive than you first think. You think they're outside in the big bad world. They are, of course, but they sometimes think that schools are a little protected and cloistered environment where actually they're not as secure as they might be or could be. So look at those legal points and really understand where the school sits, both as a data controller and with the DPIA, and making sure that you understand where the data is coming to and going from and what happens to it in between times. So the decision then really is where on the risk scale does the school want to be? Now, the NSPCC lists the following concerns, as you can see on the slides. And really there's a problem with images being modified and misused. We've heard about that, which is not great. A child being identified for purposes of grooming, and a vulnerable child being identified by an existing perpetrator of abuse. Now, parents don't help themselves with this, because by the age of 5, the average child has got something like 45 to 50 images of birthday parties on some form of social media with parents somewhere. Now, most of those social media posts will be locked down to a family group or a group, a privacy group. Some will be open. The reason I mention it is that the social engineering that goes into that, and that's what this is called. It's sort of it is more than a form of exploitation. It very much is a form of exploitation. People will wait and watch that child age whatever, let's say 5, grow to 18, and all of a sudden they've got their birthday. They know who their nearest family members are, and that child is very much at risk because that data has been gathered on them all the way through their lives. So the last thing you want to be doing as a school is adding to that. And so really you want to be pretty low down the risk scale, I would say, as low as you can be without damaging your marketing and communications. And I understand completely Tori's take on this and Rachel's as well, but there's a very distinct tension between the two things, safety and accessibility and selling. So my recommendation, please adopt a very cautious approach to that. Assess the images and understand from an image if you can identify the pupil, first of all. If it's a group of pupils, it's taken a good distance away, perhaps at a sports fixture or something, not too much of an identification risk. If it's obviously a group that's not one person prominent, then that's fabulous. And then suitability for publication. You've got to think about all of those three things. If it is a single head and shoulder shot of somebody having won a medal at some competition or a certificate or something, then obviously that's more prominent. And that's one where you need to be very, very careful about the data that's involved in that image. Now, images include not just the picture, but there's also the metadata in behind and with them. Strip out the metadata before anything's published at all, because that stops the chances of it being exploited. Use lower resolution images. Obviously make it more difficult for people to exploit it. Try and avoid using real names. And then think about relying on explicit parental consent. Let's take the worst of those examples, the head and shoulder shot of an athlete having just won, let's say 400 meters or something, who has a medal around his or her neck, and it's Joe Bloggs of whatever school, really proud, he's broken the 400 meters record, here we are, got his medal. Now, to publish that, I would like you to think that you can't publish it at all without explicit parental consent. So get into the mindset of, if we publish anything, do the parents know? First point. Do the parents expect us to? Second point. Third point, have the parents given us permission? Now, that's the way I'd like you to think, please, because that's the way that safety, you can build safety into this. But what I would say, and it's the bit in blue at the bottom, you can't put that consent in place for all uses of pupil imagery, but really it's the marketing use, particularly online, and the whole business of identification, risk, prominence, and suitability are the three factors that have got to come into that debate as you're thinking it. So if you're coming away from this talk feeling a little bit nervous about sharing images, then wonderful. But work out, please, why you're nervous. Are you going through the right thought processes? Have you got the right processes in the school? If you think you need consent, are you getting it? And if you're getting it, how long does it last for and when can it be withdrawn? All good questions. So we'll move on to the next slide. Is consent a legal requirement to take or share images of pupils? No, it isn't, but best practice. So be careful about the law and the best practice bit and the parental expectations, because you can lose more reputation for the school by cutting across what the parents expect you to do than by breaking the law, if that makes sense. Photographs are not special category information, which means that legitimate interest, which is a thing under GDPR, works for administrative and internal uses of photographs. So those photographs we talked about with the children with medical conditions, other areas in the school where they need to be known for the administration in their pupil files, legitimate interest is absolutely fine because the school has that legitimate interest to run its business properly, and to run its business properly, it needs those images. Very straightforward. However, there needs to be a DPIA, i.e. the method of taking the image, using it, storing it, disposing of it, so that people understand whilst the school has a legitimate interest and it is exercising it, that it's doing it properly and correctly, and it ends up with a disposal plan when the pupil leaves for getting rid of the pupil file or filleting it, whatever you choose to do with your policy. But the whole point about legitimate interest is, yes, it gives the school something to work with, but it has its responsibilities. So there's an exception to legitimate interest, which is biometric processing. Sometimes facial recognition is used for access to parts of the school or the school itself. And that's not legitimate interest, because that means the Protection and Freedoms Act comes into play and consent is required from parents for children under 18. but pupils can object at any age to this, and that overrides the parental consent. So as soon as you get into biometric stuff, that gets one level more complicated, but we'll not spend too much time on that, just to alert you to the fact that not everything can be covered under legitimate interest if you are using facial recognition to do, to do access control to the school. Now, with all these things, and I've outlined in the last sort of 15 minutes really the knottiness of this problem. We're not all starting from the same place. The law is pretty clear. Parents' expectations put an extra responsibility on the school. The school's got responsibilities built into UK GDPR. Okay, it gets worse. DFE, guidance aimed at maintained schools, says you must get consent to share photos on your school's social media channels or elsewhere online. Brilliant. But it then waters that down. It's very straightforward, what I've just said, but it then waters that down to say printed materials such as prospectus or marketing materials may be considered as legitimate interest. Now, I have a problem with that second part, because if I was the parent of a child who featured in a prospectus or whose image was on the side of a minibus, take a ridiculous example, I would expect to be asked if that was suitable and if I gave consent for that, and if the child is of an age, if he or she did too. So that's the DFE guidance. But again, you see where the law stops and parental expectations begin. I don't think I'm being hypersensitive by making the point I've just made about being expected to be asked for prospectus or marketing material inclusion. But you can make up your own minds as to how your parents are thinking. So there you are. So if you take the DFE guidance, and we think we understand that, consent for everything on social media, don't need consent for written materials, but we think parents would prefer that. The ICO suggests an opt-out approach for schools wishing to use pupil photographs for promotional purposes with a right to object by parents or by older pupils. That's a wee bit of a cop-out. I would go with the DFE guidance, and as I say, make up your minds about what your parents will be thinking and expecting. So what I'm saying really here is go with the more strict guidance, which is DFE, and yes, okay, the ICO have got a view, but it's not anything that we can use pragmatically, I would say. So really the bottom line for us is seek consent for online uses of images, including social media, unless mitigations are in place against the risk of identification. In other words, if it's a group shot where no people can be identified from it, then that's okay. Because there's no risk. But if it's the head and shoulder shot we talked about with the athlete, perhaps, then that's a whole different ballgame. Pardon the pun. So that really is the line that we have taken, and that's been built on advice from Farrers, the lawyers, and also taking in DFE and ICO advice as well. So the general points, please bear in mind this policy isn't going to be a huge sort of tome of all the things of recommended good practice. It really only touches on the issues of child protection, cyberbullying, sexting, and online safety. So do be aware of that. But you do need to have separate policies with e-safety, bullying, and acceptable use of IT built into them. And this should plug into that, as I said at the beginning. Do bear in mind that pupils will be taking images of themselves and each other, and how staff need to act in connection with that as well. Also, putting in place regular guidance and training for staff is an absolute necessity, and particularly those who handle pupil images. Again, the DPIA will drive what they do or should do, and also those who are working with the social media channels that the school will use. Just bear in mind, and when it comes down to the use of personal devices, that the Met Police are under an instruction to interview under caution anybody who's found with images of children on their telephone or any phone camera with images of children other than their own immediate family. So they are taking a very strict line on the images being captured of children by people who are not connected to them. So if parents are in the habit of using their personal devices for school stuff, which some do, please make sure that those images are cleaned off the devices as quickly as practicable, because they really shouldn't be uploaded, as it says here, to personal linked cloud accounts and off school systems. That really is a big issue. So please make teachers aware of the, the constraints that they're under and the view the authorities are taking of this. So taking and using the images of children. Please also be clear with teachers and pupils about interacting with pupils and former pupils online and by social media. There have been some amazing disasters with that, where confidences have been breached or questions have been asked and answered, and it all comes back to bite somebody either within the school or who has just left. But either way, it doesn't do the school reputation any good whatever. And finally, social media accounts, please make sure it's closed. There are a good number of people who've come across them open. They're set up for the best of reasons, and the security is not looked at or reviewed. So not only should the security be looked at and reviewed, but the need for the account should be looked at and reviewed as well. If it's not something that you're using and it's lying dormant, why have it? Get rid of it. If it's something that's used only occasionally, that's fine. So do you set it up for each occasion of use, or do you leave it running the whole time? I would try, if at all possible, to get the number of accounts down to those that you're using day and daily. And there's nothing sort of sitting in the background that's not being used and perhaps has got some old data in it, because you'd have to answer a very awkward question if that was the case. Why have you got that data and how are you using it? And you really wouldn't know, because this dormant account has been sitting for a while, not being accessed by anyone. So there's some general bits. So we talked about consent and how does a school get it? There's a standard form, and it will come with the policy. There is also a general permission in the school contract terms if you have a parent contract, which all of you will have, I hope, in some form or other. But don't rely on it. It doesn't constitute a meaningful, freely given or specific consent. It's a kind of general, here's how we do the admin stuff consent, if you want to put it that way. So it's really just pointing parents towards the legitimate interest use of images. We talked about those for administration, if you remember. If you've got senior school pupils, the consent should come from them, because don't forget there's the GLIC competence age, and there's a wrinkle around that, is around the age of 13. Some schools use the age of 12 in normal circumstances if the pupil is competent to make the decision, which almost they always will be. There's a tick box opt-in form. That should be from, I beg your pardon, it should be form. Apologies for the typo. And not always, doesn't always work. Consent from time to time will be required for one-off events. And if a parent or child decides to withdraw their consent, that can happen at any time, and it has to be respected. And one of the branches in your DPIA, the impact assessment, is what you do if the consent's withdrawn. And there are a number of actions that you can take, obviously taking down images off social media, that kind of stuff. But there's some rules surrounding prospectuses and written and printed materials. So do be careful of that and be ready for people to say, actually, I don't like that anymore. I want it gone. And you've got to go with it, because if they've withdrawn consent, then that's that. They have the whip hand here. So the rights of pupils is in common with all the rights of data subjects. Right to give or withdraw consent for use of their personal data, the absolute right to object to the use of data for marketing purposes, qualified right to object to any processing carried out on a legitimate interest basis. So they can squeak about legitimate interests, but you equally can be quite robust in your defense of how you're using the data if you've thought about it and you've done your data control stuff properly. The right to access the data, in some cases have it deleted, that's the DPIA again. And the right in general terms to be informed about the use of data, including images by the school. Well, that's only courtesy if you think about it. If you've got images of children, staff also as well, then really they should know where their data is going. It makes sense on a really basic level. Obviously, with young children, that's the parental responsibility. In most cases, no older than 12. The statutory age of consent under UK GDPR is 13. Different in Scotland, as you can see the line below. So do take a look at that. Just remember where, for those of you in prep schools and senior schools, obviously they would be very au fait with this, but some with sort of year 7 and 8 pupils, you'll find it a little more difficult to handle, I beg your pardon. So So there you are. That as the bottom line really are the rights of the pupils. So just in summary, then we've been through making you think about what level of risk is acceptable. You've had a real canter through what UK GDPR requires of the school. You understand now how this policy will react with other school policies. Is there an impact assessment of the life of an image in the school, the DPIA, which I keep on talking about? Do parents understand the risks? What is the school organisation for getting consent? What is the school organisation for dealing with its withdrawal, if it is withdrawn? And has the school an organisation for dealing with complaints about this? And really, are the rights of pupils properly represented in the policy? So it's all a little bit of a knotty problem. And as I said right at the beginning, we're not all starting this from a level playing field. This is all started sort of halfway through, if you like, because you've all have images all over the place probably. And you're really going to have to try and tie this down into a policy and make things much safer for children, because there are ill-disposed people out there who will exploit any image they can get their fingers around, which does not help at all. So that is a very brief sort of 30-minute, 25-minute canter through this problem. Questions obviously will be in the chat, and Tori will act as the question master in a minute. The ISBA library document is number 13, and that's the link to it, but it will come round with the slides from this presentation, and you can access it whether you are ISBA members or not, because when it comes to pupil safety, we're all in this together, and we need to make sure the pupils are as safe as they can decently be. So, Tori, do we have any questions? Hopefully you're going to say none, and that would be marvellous.
We do. What I'm going to do, John, is I know that some of this you have covered, but I think that people are asking it in a specific way now. So is that okay if I sort of maybe just reiterates what you've said? So I'll start with the first one. What would you recommend for schools who regularly work with press to promote the success of children? This school has quite a few children in national teams, Team GB, where we would regularly support parents and sports agencies with press releases to promote their success.
Consent.
So I think they're asking, how do you know,
how do you deal with it?
One person head and shoulders image.
Yeah, well, that was one of the reasons why I used that as an example, but that's an absolute case in point of making the parents aware, or that indeed the pupil, depending on how old they are, that consent is required for this. And you can do consent in, for the Daily Telegraph for the next 2 weeks, so you can time limit it and limit it to where the image is going to go. Or you can say, well, it's for the next three months or whatever. Or you can make it the specific instance. You've just won the 400 meters, so anything to do with that is fine. So I would say consent is the way to go with that. Is that how it's been done? I shouldn't be asking that question.
They haven't said that that's how it's been done.
I shouldn't be asking that question.
So the second question is, how can we regulate third-party suppliers such as Splat in terms of long-term image protection? They supply images for parents and schools largely for free.
Okay, which agency was that?
Splat.
Okay.
Splat.
It's a very good question, but they should have the same policies as the school.
Right.
Where they'll have a data protection policy. I hope they'll have DPIA, they'll have all of that. But who is the data controller in that? And that's a question to put to them. Are they controlling the data, or is the school? And that's where the responsibility shifts. I think I would be asking that. And the other question I'd be asking, it's a really awkward one, is where the images are stored. Are they stored on a UK server, or are they abroad?
Right. Okay.
That's another. I mean, that's opened up a real discussion point. I'm quite happy to take that offline and get into a conversation with that. Okay,
thank you very much. Could the person who posed that question, you've got John there, you've got his contact details if you want to have a further discussion.
Please use them. Yeah.
Next question, and again, these are questions that I think you've answered, but let's just get total clarity. Is verbal consent adequate from parents, or does it need to be written?
I'm a nasty Scottish bursar. I don't believe in verbal anything. So
okay,
I would, to preserve the reputation of the school and to stop any misunderstandings, I would always have it at least in an email.
Right. Thank you. Next one, interesting one this is. When you talk about disposal of images, how does this square with the use of archival images for alumni relation purposes?
Well, there's a very good organization that looks after school archives. I think it's called School Archives Association. They've got very similar policies to ours because we wrote them in parallel. So you'll find that the two policies complement. And yes, you can store those images in an archive. There are some times where you'll need consent, but sometimes it's legitimate interest. And you've just got to look at the rules under which the archivists are working, and go by those. It's remarkably straightforward. It really doesn't vary terribly much from the school use.
Okay, thank you. I think we've probably covered this one off, but just again, please can you confirm if the advice is to gain consent for every single image, or whether consent can be sought in advance for all images used, including social media? But I think this is down to the individual or the group shots and etc., isn't it?
It is. It's got to be a risk-based thing, hasn't it? You've got to decide what's the legitimate interest, and we've decided that, and then what needs consent, and then within the images in, say, that bundle of perhaps a sports tournament or something, if it's a team shot taken some distance away, then that's fine. If it's the head and shoulder shot of the winning captain, then that's a different thing. So you can't give well, could you ask for a blanket consent? Yes, you could. Could it be argued with? Yes. Is it likely to be withdrawn? Yes, because the parent will not realize what it is they're actually consenting to, perhaps, and nor indeed the pupils if they're of that age.
Okay. There's something we've just explained about a group shot being far enough away, and somebody's actually said here, and I can see what they're saying is a bit of a grey area, because how far away and who's, still, is it too small even if part of a team?
And also, is it low resolution or high resolution? Can it be exploited? All of that's to do with the risk, the risk that the school's willing to take. And what I was trying to do, and I don't think I've done it very successfully, is to make people realize there's a difference in images, far away, head and shoulder shots, and also how those can be exploited. Obviously, easier to exploit the way we are appearing on the screen now than if we're in the background of a 25-meter rugby match at some point. Not that we like to be at this age, but no, never mind.
Should you get consent from both senior school pupils 13 plus and their parents, or just the pupil?
It's the pupil who's got the rights. So really only they need to have given consent, but I think it would be courteous to tell the parents. But I think it only is a courtesy and a way of keeping communication going with the parent body and trying to build that trust in the way the school's doing its business and therefore meet their expectations for privacy. And I must say that the expectations will be more difficult to handle than the law. I made the point, I think the law is quite straightforward, but the parent expectations will be huge in some cases and completely ignored in others. So it's very difficult to work out where they are, but treat them as though they are the ultimate arbiter of standards, because they are the ones that will complain if they think you've got it wrong.
Thank you. Is a newsletter sent via email considered the same as a social media channel or a print publication?
An email sent via a newsletter sent via email.
Newsletter sent via email, is that the same?
It will go to a closed group of people. You'd have to subscribe to it, wouldn't you? Yeah. So it's closed. So it's not a social media channel in that sense. There is a risk that the email boundaries will be breached. Of course there is. But it's not as easily breached as a social media bit or as easily hacked. So it's less of a risk, but it's a risk.
Thank you. This actually ties in with the alumni thing, and I think you've answered it. Do we need to dispose of all images of children who have left the school? I suppose that goes alongside what we were talking about with the alumni storage, etc., and what you've said about policies.
If it helps, there is a data retention policy, a template policy, and some guidance in the ISBA library. It's an enormously long document because it's very detailed and it will answer that question. So whoever that is, if they want to drop me a line, I'll happily send that on to them and advise if needs be on that.
Thank you. Do you recommend a formal photography management software platform to help manage images, in particular if consent has been withdrawn to use images?
Yes, I do.
Do you know of any particular one that you would particularly...
No, because not all of them can pass the test of where do you keep the images. It's better if it's somebody in the school. the two schools I was in, we had a very active marketing department, and they were absolute demons at this, keeping images for only as long as they needed them, and then using them when they were supposed to. If you can get that thought process into the mind of the marketing and communications people, then that really is the key to success. And you've got control sitting in front of you in the form of an employee who knows what it means and knows the responsibilities.
Thank you. This is an interesting one. Should schools avoid using full names in social posts?
Yes.
Thank you.
Either initials or just first names or second, whatever. But yes, the identity is difficult. Yeah.
I have to say, John, there's a lot of questions here. There's 52 questions there.
That's all right. Yeah, that's okay.
But a number of them, and there's another one here, is all around the alumni thing. So that's really interesting. And I think you've answered it. But
we could do a separate session on that if you want to. We can go through the archiving bit. It wouldn't. Yeah. It would be another 20 minutes. Yeah.
It is definitely coming up in these questions. Would you recommend deleting old social media on a rolling basis?
Yes.
Yeah. We have a freelance graphic designer who was regularly shared images for the purpose of creating marketing literature. How should we handle this?
They should have their own policies for the use of images. So the school in this case is the data controller. It's giving data to this third party. That third party should be acting in the same way as the school would be to protect the privacy of the children in the images, and actually have their own impact assessment as to what they do with the images as well. So it's a case of making sure that those mechanisms are in place with a third party, so that when the school is asked as the data controller, what have you done with image of Joe Blogs, they can say, well, it's with this company, this is what they do with it, this is what we've asked them to produce with it, and this is what they'll do with the data after it's finished with, or the photograph after it's finished with. So it's so basically that company becomes an offshoot of the school's data protection system, in the same way that caterers do with some of the very sensitive information with allergies, etc. You would ask the same questions of them.
Yeah,
you're giving me that look which says it's very difficult.
The workload that's going into this,
which
I know is needed. I know it's needed.
Yep.
Here's one, and this is so. When you mentioned closed groups, was this in relation to social media platforms? I.e., should you have a private Instagram?
Yes. Yeah. If it's private, yes, lock it down. Absolutely do.
And how do you monitor check who's accepting? Well, then somebody would have to check who's coming into each one. You have your moderator, of course you do.
But really, the basic precautions are, sorry to interrupt you, Tori. The basic precautions are to make sure it's locked down, but also taking the metadata off the image. Just make the image an image, nothing else on there that can be exploited.
Okay. Can a school's image consent form cover the consent options in one go? But I think we're going back to this idea that yes, but it's the head and shoulders individual that you might need to get a one-off consent for.
Yep. When you have a look at the notes, there's a section in there about what we've called a sort of tick box form, where parents can just go sort of tick things all the way down the list. And the danger of that is they might not understand what they've just done. I know I'm talking as though parents are not really engaged in this, and you've got to kind of go with the mental image that they're not really until you tell them and educate them. Yes, you can use that form, but be careful of its dangers.
So just, I'm really sorry, just to go back onto that social media platform side of things, and I really do get what this person's saying. It says, in terms of closed social media groups, it's a vital marketing tool in that it shows the real happenings of the daily basis and gives a more real reflection that poses marketing than posed marketing images. Would you recommend having a closed group for parents and then a second one public? But then I suppose, what do you put on the public one?
I wouldn't. I think, and this is exactly it's a very good question, because it's exactly the tension that exists here, isn't it? The parents want to see what's going on. Closed group, fine. Publish what you need to publish on that within the constraints of a closed group, and make sure everybody understands the confidentiality of it. So you've done as much as you can do to make that secure. And then if you've got to go public on that, then those shots which are difficult for people to take identity from, or perhaps use Shutterstock images or something on the public website. And this is a place, and we discussed this before we started the presentation, Tori, where AI generated images might end up being published, because the risk of putting something in the public domain, I would contend, is too high now.
Right.
I mean, well, what do you see this more than I, and you're the expert in this, but
Yeah,
from a
yeah.
bursar's point of view, I'd take some persuading.
Okay. This is another one here. We give out our annual yearbook at Open Day. Would you recommend no longer doing this? It contains student images. We use it as an alternative prospectus.
It's printed, isn't it? Printed material.
Yeah.
So that's legitimate interest in a lot of ways, but take a look at it, and make sure that there's nothing, well, there's going to be lots of stuff in there. But do read the policy and the policy notes first, and take a look at that and see if it fits. I'm sure it does. Yes, it is a risk, but it's one where the risk is minimal.
Thank you. Does the 7-year rule of keeping data not apply to images? I'm presuming not, because of the archives, and you're talking about being okay to go into archives.
You're going to love this answer. It depends.
Oh.
And we've got a note on it. And the reason I'm being slightly flippant, but only to draw attention to the fact that there's a note on this, and I really think that people need, and what I'll do is I'll put it round with this other piece as well. You've got guidelines for the retention of data, and I think you should be looking to those too.
Right, I've got quite a long one here, but is it possible to have a blanket? We will use your children's image in schools marketing unless you tell us otherwise, included in parents' contracts. We don't. We ask them to complete a separate form with explicit consent for different uses, but we have over 100 pupils whose parents have opted out of their child being used for marketing use, and frankly, it's a bit of a nightmare from a marketing point of view. We seem to be one of the few schools that do this. So,
well, my first answer is to congratulate the school on taking the correct approach here. That's exactly what should be happening. And your point about workload and their point about it being a bit of a nuisance, absolutely take that. But that is the way they should be doing business with those parents. Those parents will trust the school implicitly to look after the images and data that they've got on their children. I think that's an excellent position to be in. I'm sorry it's a bit painful.
How does AI impact on the recognition of pupils? Well, we talked about that before we came on, didn't we? It's
in two ways. Firstly, it will make the identification of a pupil much more easy, because it can do a comparison of what the image has been taken against the database it can hold. Obviously, the law enforcement agencies are the people leading on that, but there are some private databases as well. So that's the first point. But the second point is that AI can be used to manipulate the image, and that's what's happened in the past. Where schools have been held to ransom to get that particular image, which has been exploited, back in their possession. So two things: one is identification, second is manipulation.
Okay. Somebody's just asked if we can share the details of the archive service, the archive. So if we can share that as well. I'll pick that up with you, John, afterwards. When we send everything out, we can share that as well. What about video and films and how children appear? Does the same rules apply?
Yes.
Okay. What qualifies as low resolution where software allows people to enhance low res images in any case? Which
I know it's one of those things that people like me throw into conversations and say that's the answer, it's low resolution, but it's very difficult to say, because you've got to then work out what can be exploited from that photograph and what else is in the background and what's distorting the images or whatever. I am not a technical expert at this, but that is one defense in that great risk analysis that you've got to do.
Thank you. Should we re-consent every year?
I would say yes, but also within that, perhaps say you might want to add in particular consents for one-off events, so perhaps the school play or the sports event we talked about, or if there's something happening like a school trip, something something like that. Yes, you can do it every year, and I think you should. But also, I think within that, you need to be very alive to different significant events that will attract coverage and will be useful for marketing and comms.
Thank you. We're a prep school and part of a group with a senior school. If our senior school wants to use our children in their social feeds, do we require parental consent for them to be used outside of our school's channel? And
Absolutely,
it's a
yes.
bit of a,
Well,
it's basically saying we are part of a group, but then
yeah, but the school is the data controller. The let's call it the prep school is the data controller here.
yeah,
So they've got to be very aware of where the data is going. So it goes to the senior school, who, as we discussed before, then becomes handling that data, has got its DPIA and all these little processes in place, so that the prep school can then say to the parent, well, we've given it to the senior school. You did advise that we could, and here's how they'll handle it, and here's how they'll finish with it. So you've got to be able to trace that all the way through.
yeah. We had a separate site for our early years, and we use a mobile phone to answer the buzzer on the gate. In the early years statutory guides, it says that the policies must include how mobile phone cameras and other electronic devices with images and sharing capacity. What policy should this be in?
That's so it's used to answer the gate. So presumably there's an entry phone camera on the gate. Is that the idea here?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
maybe that's one that.
Can I take that one offline?
Yeah, I was
I'd like
about
to
to
give
say, do
quite a
you want to take
comprehensive
that
answer to
offline
that.
and just
Yeah,
read through it again? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
please.
Let's see. We are a sixth form for those aged 15 upwards, and we currently use parental consent rather than student consent. What about international students? Is it different?
No. The rights of the child in this country, I think, will apply. I will get an answer to that, though, definitively. So can I have that one as well?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
And what
good.
would the advice be on competitor schools running live streams of sports matches? Concerns over permission and best practice, or
You're almost at the point of banning that, aren't you? Because you can't find a way of getting the right consents for everybody who's on the pitch. Because if you think of the school who said, we've got 100 parents who said they don't want any images of their children used for marketing purposes, that makes that whole live streaming thing much more awkward, doesn't it? Because they almost can't do it. So that's a very awkward one. Can I bottle out of that and have some time to think about it and come back in writing?
yeah, yeah. How do you run social media paid campaigns with closed accounts?
You can't.
That's yeah. So I think a lot of the other questions are very much, I think, are covering what we've already covered. You know, things such as how do you propose we market our schools if we can't use images of children? I think you're saying that you can, but it's the consent needs to be absolutely.
It's the consent and the risk that you're facing. You've got to be very clear that this is not the lovely environment that you'd like it to be. We have got people out there who will take these images and mess with them. And you've got to decide, is my marketing worth that and that risk? Or you know, have I got consent for that from the parents? Do they understand the risk, and are we doing the best we can to reduce it? So it's not a straightforward question.
Okay, and just one here. You talk about removing metadata from a photo. Could you clarify what you mean?
Okay, the photograph comes with where it was taken, who took it, the date it was taken, all that stuff. You can take all that off before
Right.
the image is used, and that helps reduce the risk. It doesn't stop it, but it helps reduce the risk of exploitation.
Thank you. Now, here's one. Surely differentiating between printed material and digital is pointless, as anyone can take a photo of a printed photo and it becomes digital.
Yeah, but it's not exploitable in the same way.
Right.
And it's also an area where, as you saw, or you will see in the note itself, is where there is a difference in the way the law looks at digital images and hard copy material.
Okay. What should be visible on a school website? This conversation is making me feel like there shouldn't be any images of children.
Well, that I would congratulate that person and thank them for listening, because I want them to be questioning what's there. So that's the right thing to do. But do take a look and see, if you put yourself in the position of somebody trying to exploit the image and say, well, does that photograph can I use that for something other than what was intended? So you've got to look at it from a risk point of view. It's very difficult to do because it's not an area we've had to be expert in, but we now have to be.
Okay, thank you. And I don't really advice for handling things like school concerts, large-scale events, where you may want to take an overall picture, but it includes a number of children with whom permission has been withdrawn.
How do you do
Blown
it?
faces, adding emojis, equally unpopular. I suppose the answer is you can't have them in the picture.
You can't. You can't. And this is the if you think of a school production, if you take a photograph from the back of the room across the top of the audience to the stage, which is in the far distance, then that's low risk because it's difficult to identify people. If you've got particular children whose parents have said no, you can blur the little faces on the stage, and it doesn't look too bad. But it all gets very, very awkward. And the lady or gentleman who said, I'm thinking about having no images at all, you can see why people are thinking that way now, can't you? Because it's very, very awkward, this.
Yeah. Just I'm going to give you this one final one, and then what I'm going to do alongside Rachel is to go through these questions afterwards and make absolutely sure that we did cover them all, and if not, we will send out the answers. So the last one is we have a batch of school iPhones that are solely for taking images. They don't have SIM cards or any internet access. How do these need to be incorporated into a policy? They are all in clear school iPhone cases, so people know staff aren't using personal phones to take images of children. Is this okay?
Yes, that's a very good system, because what will be happening is that the images that will be taken on the iPhone, as you say, is properly marked, downloaded onto the school server if that's what happens, and then the iPhone will be cleared. So even if the iPhone's lost, there's nothing on there that's going to be a disaster. And also, if anybody's using a phone that's not marked in the school case, they know that it's not correct. So no, I think that's a very good way of doing things.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop the questions there. As I say, Rachel and I will just go through them after this webinar and make absolutely sure we covered them. A lot were, I think, duplicates, or this is a similar sort of question being asked. All that remains for me to say is thank you, John, for taking the time to be here. This is a really, really big issue, and you know, you've given us so much food for thought and so much help. So thank you, and thank you to everybody who's been on this call. Copies of the slides and the recording will be sent to you in due course. And as I say, if there's any questions we didn't cover, we will make sure they go out as well. So thank you everybody for being here, and have a good week.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation, Tori, and good morning, everybody.